Good morning. I don't want to break all the interesting conversations. You're having lots of fun, but I guess we have a conference to do. So good morning, all. Welcome again. Gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. You have to know that this conference is not like other conferences where we have a certain defined topic where we invite defined experts to come and speak on certain scientific issues. This conference happens throughout the year. A few of us meet, whoever can, from time to time, and we discuss whoever has struck us, who we've met during the year, and you'll see that's why the program is as eclectic as it is. I like to say it's eclectic because it has a wide variety of speakers. So this is what happened with our keynote speaker this morning. I was attending grand rounds in surgery at McGill earlier this year, and then the name of the speaker, Mary Brandt, rang a bell. They said, "I know that name. That was that name of one of my favorite residents." She's a pediatric surgeon, so I was in pediatric surgery as a general surgeon to do 2 months in your second year or in your first year, and then never do it again. But there was this one resident who really struck me by her humanity, her wisdom, her intelligence, and her way of being with us, her way of taking care of us. And not only did she strike me, but there are two other people here who also, there you are, Jean-Luc, who's now a pediatric cardiologist at Saint Justine. You're a resident of him, that's right. And also, Marc is Marc here, Marc Auchan, not yet. Anyway, so the three of us remember her very well. And it was really funny because she was introduced at McGill, and nobody had clicked into the fact that she had actually studied, been a fellow at Saint Justine. And so then we made a connection afterwards, and she heard about this conference and she was delighted to come. And her parcours is quite interesting. I'm going to summarize a beautiful CV now, and then have her speak. But Mary Brandt is the Distinguished Emeritus Professor of Surgery, Pediatrics and Medical Ethics at Baylor College of Medicine in the Center for Medical Ethics and Health Policy. During her long career as a pediatric surgeon, that means we had a long career too, I guess, she cared for the full spectrum of surgical problems in children, particular expertise in caring for children with biliary atresia, achalasia, necrotizing enterocolitis, and pediatric dialysis access. An established and successful clinical researcher, she's published more than 245 peer-reviewed publications. It's a little bit more than we did, Jean-Luc, including 26 chapters and 2 books. Mary is known nationally and internationally as an educator and mentor, and we can testify to that even when she was still a fellow, and has received numerous teaching awards. She was the dean of she was a general surgery program director at Baylor and dean of student affairs at Baylor College of Medicine. And this work led to her growing expertise in belonging and the epidemic of healer distress in our country and worldwide. So to better understand and write about these issues, I'm going to read this, Mary, if you don't mind. She pursued a Master of Divinity degree, graduating in June 2021. So it's unusual to have a pediatric surgeon do a Master's of Divinity degree, graduating from the Ilif School of Theology. So as a result, she speaks and writes regularly on identifying, correcting systemic issues in medicine and the importance of meaning to heal those who heal others. In recognition of her leadership and contributions in 2023, i.e. last year, she was awarded the Ladd Medal, which is the most prestigious award in American pediatric surgery. So the topic is not going to be the exact same. She's going to talk about something that's very dear to me. I love that, her new title, which is We Are Healers, Not Providers. It's always irked me to hear the word provider. I know where it comes from, but we are healers, not provider. And she's warning me and all of you that she wants to start a revolution. Mary, come and tell us about it.
Bonjour, ça me fait bien de revenir au Québec, and I'm not going to speak in French, but I wanted to say hello to the Francophones, because I am trilingual, sort of. I speak English, French, and Quebecois after being... So before we get started, actually, even before we get started, I want everybody for a minute to just take a deep breath and gather attention. Because what a sacred space and what a community is here. It's already obvious to me that this is an amazing connection and an amazing group of people. And so let's just honor being together. And let's also honor, recognize, and respect, and I hope I don't mispronounce this, the Kanyan Kehaka people, who are the traditional stewards of the land and water on which we stand today. So, where am I going to take us today? How I started thinking about being called a provider, and that is because of the work I've been doing for a very long time in burnout and distress. What belonging has to do with all of this, and then I'm going to give you the answer, all right? And the hint is it's not 42. Okay, who gets the reference to 42? Oh, no, really? Oh, no, there's some good ones. No. So the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer to everything is 42. Okay. So a little bit of a nerd, too. So when I got started in all of this, and we evolved, and you'll see, I'll do a little bit of this timeline, but we started talking about burnout. And this is the definition of burnout that's given by the World Health Organization, a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, characterized by 3 dimensions. And this definition is now appearing not only on board exams and in training exams for residents. This has become the pervasive thing. This has been this way for over 20 years now. But when I started thinking about this, and I thought, if you say that it's chronic workplace stress that's not been successfully managed, that's like saying coronary artery disease is from chronic stress that's not been successfully managed, which, by the way, is what people thought in the 1950s. Okay? So what's the pathophysiology? How do we figure out what this epidemic is that's actually got a morbidity and mortality associated with it that we really need to pay attention to? As I was contemplating this, probably about 10 years ago, I was taking care of a child in the ICU who had horrible systemic inflammatory response syndrome from appendicitis with sepsis. And I was reading and thinking about, how to get him out of this spiral of inflammation that he was tumbling down, and came across a diagram much like this, right? And so actually for me, can I just have a show of hands, physicians? Nurses? Other healers? Okay. Who did I miss? A researcher. Solving problems for the future. That's good. So the reason I ask that is if I do a little medical term like this, I'm going to translate it, okay? So basically what this amounts to is that in this model of this spiral that human beings can get into that can kill them, there's a lot of different things that can start that spiral, okay? It often is infection that can lead to sepsis, but it can also be trauma or burns or pancreatitis. And so I began to look at this, and for some reason it clicked, and I said, what if we started thinking about burnout like this? That instead of a unmanaged stress, we said, what are the things in the buckets, the etiologies that lead to this problem? First one I came up with was inadequate self-care, which we'll come back to because I no longer believe that. Failure to recover from injury. So people who do the work that healers do get injured in their work. We were talking a minute ago about some of the emotional injuries that we get, physical injuries if you're a surgeon, etc., we don't ever in our systems allow ourselves time to recover from those injuries. And then finally, moral distress. And that could be personal, societal, or institutional. And then, of course, you come up with a new model like this, which I think might be helpful, right? It's going to help us think more about how to study this and what to do about it. What do you call the model, right? So I decided I would call it physician distress syndrome. Now, the first thing you do when you name something, right, is you look at the initials and make sure you haven't done something really terrible. So I looked up PDS. And it turns out polydexone, which is every surgeon's favorite suture, okay, so that was cool. It's also photothermal deflection spectroscopy. It is the partially deceased syndrome, and the BBC showed in the flesh, and a particularly dangerous situation in weather watching. So I decided, well, that's cool, okay. But then a very dear friend of mine who's a nurse practitioner came to me and said, Mary, it's not just physicians, you know. You can't call it that. But no problem. You can keep the initials. You can call it provider distress syndrome. Except that I don't really use the word provider. Now, provider really does seem like a good word for the thing we need, which is a global word that talks about all of us, right? I had to put this up here because this is a Texan thing. And from Dallas, you know this too. So, you know, in French, it's very difficult in English to have the plural you, right? So in Texas, we solved that by saying you, y'all, and all y'all. Okay, so now you can speak a little Texan too. But the reason I don't use the word provider is that it is a word that has a lot of meaning behind the word that we need to think about. I'm going to read this quote because you probably can't read it in the back. Medical provider is part of the new speak of America's industrialized medical machine. It implies a prepackaged commodity on a shelf that is provided to the consumer, rather than something personalized and dynamic, crafted by skilled professionals and tailored to the individual patient. It's a bit loud. It's not loud enough. Oh my God. I'm never going to accuse of that. But here's the thing, you know, so provider could work like clinician, that's a little cold. But the reality is the people we call providers in our hospitals are the ones that bill. The other reason I don't use it is because in Nazi Germany, Jewish doctors had their title of doctor removed and were degraded to the term Behandler, which means provider. So what do you call this? Okay, because we do have to have a plural word. And the word that I've decided to take is healer distress syndrome because it's what we do. And so that is the evolution of coming to this title and to what we're doing. Now, the syndrome and the whole understanding of SEERS and sepsis and the medical side has evolved. It's an amazing area of research that we're making progress in. And the kind of newer models also really pertain. We still have burnout and distress at the center. We still have the two things that I mentioned before, which are very important: failure to recover from injury and moral distress. As I said earlier, I don't believe inadequate self-care is an etiology. I think it's a comorbidity, like diabetes in a septic patient. So not having care for yourself, which is maybe a little different than self-care, which is kind of weaponized, can add to the problem, but it doesn't cause the problem. But there was also one really big thing in this bucket that I didn't realize at the beginning that I've come to realize. That one of the biggest contributions to our distress and to what's happening in medical systems around the world, in North America and especially in the United States, is this sense of isolation and marginalization that healers have to deal with. Now, the dysregulated host response still holds true here. breaches in professionalism, relationship failures, substance abuse, depression, and anxiety, all signs of a healer in distress. And the life-threatening dysfunctions, alcoholism, drug addiction, and suicidality, to which we lose so many of our colleagues. And this model for clinicians gives us one more big thing, because there is always an answer to SEERS and to sepsis. It's source control. It means you remove, decrease, or modify the source of the problem, and then you provide supportive care. So I decided for today, we could go into, and I'm happy to talk about the other things, the failure to recover from injury and the moral distress. And I decided today to focus on the one we don't talk about in this context very often, and that's the isolation and marginalization. And ask you to think about for a minute that the opposite of marginalization is belonging. And so when we're talking about healing the healers, one of the very key things that we have to concentrate on is this sense of belonging. And so when you're doing this, you're like, well, how am I going to organize this? So, did you ever think we always give antibiotics by American football scores? 7, 10, 14, 21, right? It's always numbers of fingers on a hand or days in the week, so I have a little aside there, but I realized that even in organizing a talk, it's easy to do. So I decided that I would present to you today the 5 things that I think destroy a sense of belonging the most in our workplace, and the 5 tools we can use to create a sense of belonging. So the things that disrupt belonging are the effects of social location, the binary of us and them, believing and thinking we belong to an institution instead of the people in that institution, the dominant social norm of individualism, and power, especially if it's malevolent. Now, we already said the opposite of belonging is marginalization, which means being on the margin. But for there to be a margin, there has to be a center. And so the question is, how do you understand what that center is? And the answer is this concept of social location. How many here have heard of the concept of social location? I know that. Oh, this is great. This is a powerful, powerful way to think about this. So each person in this room has a social location. It's defined by things like age, physical abilities, etc. You can see on the outside of the ring if you're smoker, non-smoker, your religious beliefs. In every society, in every culture, there's a hierarchy that's created about social location. There's a dominant social location, and there are some that are less dominant. In North America, right now, the dominant social location is white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, less than 60 years of age, able-bodied, and not an immigrant. And what's very important about this concept is that it affects what you can see. I think this is best illustrated in the absolutely magnificent commencement address that David Foster Wallace gave called "This is Water." And he starts the commencement address with this story. There's these young fish swimming along, and they encounter the older fish coming the other way. And the older fish nods at them and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And they swim on a little bit. And one of the younger fish looks at the others and says, "What the hell is water?" Water of North American society is white, male, less than 60 years old, cisgendered, heterosexual, and white, and not an immigrant. Let me give you a more concrete example, true story. I was working with a good friend who I really consider an ally in surgery, very prominent leader, a chairman of a department, who would needle me all the time about women in surgery and, didn't understand, blah, blah, blah. He ran up to me in the hall one day when he saw me and he goes, "I just discovered something. Did you know that male physicians are introduced with their titles more than women? I see some laughter over there. Now, what I thought was only since day one of medical school. Okay. And it's true. There's actually data. People have actually measured this. When men introduce other men in grand rounds or other medical things, it's, it's 90% of the time they use their title. For women, it's 50%. Now, you've probably already figured out, if you think about that wheel, there's very few people in this room who have all of the social locations that are dominant. Okay? Very few. Which is why we have to talk about intersectionality, which is that all marginalization is connected. In a nutshell, and so to think about it, what that means is it's not just additive. Here, this is not a simple equation. If you are a black woman, it's much, much more marginalization than if you are a black man or a white woman. Intersectionality creates this powerful combination of margins that affects the people who find themselves in that intersection. And I started thinking about this one other important way, which is we all become marginalized. Everyone in medicine, no matter where else you stand on the social location wheel, every single one of us in the last 40 years, there has been this profound change in medicine and how it is controlled in the business of medicine that has taken the locus of control, the decision-making, the vision-making from the healers and moved it into a more business model. And we've all been marginalized as a result. The second thing that can destroy belonging is this concept. Human beings have a binary. In nanoseconds, when you meet someone, you decide if they're part of your tribe or not, if they're safe or not, if you need to be wary. And all change is bad change. All people are suspect until you know better, right? That's human nature. That is hardwiring. That's our primitive response. It's a hardwired response that's designed to protect us from harm. And I've started thinking about it a lot like the immune system, right? It's there as a protective medicine, but if we don't have the guardrails of culture and a conscious decision about knowing this, it can lead to destruction, uncontrolled reaction. The third thing is confusing places and people, that the institution doesn't love you back. And if you haven't read Simone's Maxims of Academic Medicine, this article, it's classic now, I highly recommend it. This is probably his most quoted. One must keep in mind that institutional relationships are really with persons who can and sometimes do love you back, right? It's not the place, it's the people. The fourth thing is that in Western society in general, and particularly in an American mentality, individualism is our dominant cultural norm. Me instead of we. That implies, and it's particularly true, I think, in surgery and in clinical practice, a zero-sum game. If you get all the clinic space, I don't have any. If you take cases, I will have fewer. It's part of a mentality that's, again, part of our cultural hardwiring. But the problem with this is it sends an explicit, or at least implicit message that you're on your own. The fifth thing, that can disrupt is power. And I want us to think a minute about power. It's actually a social technology. Okay? Power is not an evil or good thing, it is a technology. The Romans built roads that are still being used. An incredible example of social technology. But it was done with great oppression. And some of that lust for greed and power led to the downfall of Rome. So power is something that must be balanced to be innovative and create new things without adding to injustice. I've been using this painting for a while. thinking that most people knew what it was, which is, and I could ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure it's like every other time I've given this talk. The man on the right is Marion Sims, who is been designated the father of gynecology, had statues raised him. He invented the speculum, he invented all kinds of instruments. But Marion Sims was a surgeon who was hired by plantation owners in the South because women slaves were viewed as leaders by their owners. The children they had were owned by the plantation owner. And when they developed vesicovaginal fistulas, they couldn't work and they couldn't breed. And so he asked Marion Sims to take on the problem of solving vesicovaginal fistulas in women, in slaves. There were 13 women. We only know the names of 4 of them. This is Lucy, who underwent hundreds of operations without anesthesia as he developed the technique that became the foundation of modern gynecology. Power has to be used for innovation and good without adding to injustice. So the 5 things that disrupt belonging: social location, our hard wiring for a binary of us and them, thinking we belong to an institution instead of with people, individualism, and power, especially if it's malignant. Whew, all right, let's go to the good stuff. What do we do about it? So I think, I'm a surgeon. I like to have practical solutions and fix things. And so I'm going to give you 5 tools, 5 things to think about that can actually create and guard belonging. And that's asset framing, contextual creativity, the story of us, rituals, and measuring what matters. Asset framing was developed by this man, Travian Shorters, who calls himself a social entrepreneur. It pertains to what we were talking about earlier, our hard wiring to see everything as dangerous until we know it's not. That's called deficit framing. This is a conscious effort to push back against that. As he puts it, it's our human nature to look for problems and orient ourselves based on fear. So once you know that, what do? So asset framing is 3 steps, has to include all 3. And the most important one is it's not what you say about people. Like, we all go to things where we learn about vocabulary and how to refer to people, but this is one step deeper. It's not what you say about them, it's what you think about them when you first see them. It's overriding that initial danger to have a different thought when you see them. He says, is your first thought about them, the person in front of you, one that affirms their spirit? And if not, what do you need to replace it with that affirms their spirit? And once you start the conversation, once there is a community, you start always with what are the aspirations and contributions of those who are present. And then you always end with what's obstructing those aspirations and contributions. The second tool is contextual creativity, which is in this wonderful book on moral injury by Larry Kent Graham. 4 steps. Doctors love lists, right? It's like the 3 of this, the 4 of this, the 2. 4 steps in this one. Easy to remember. Name it, frame it, enact, and revise. So the last 3 years I spent in New Orleans at Tulane, and I was part of a group that was a committee that had been commissioned to help design a new gathering area in an old house right next to the hospital for the Children's Hospital in New Orleans. And the committee hired an artist, commissioned an artist, to create a big mural in this wonderful space that we have, a coffee house. We were talking about coffee earlier. Yes, my name is Mary. I am helpless and it makes for coffee. I'm a surgeon. But I hired this artist to paint this mural, and she came back with a really wonderful painting that looked much like this, with a wonderful explanation about how it honored all of the indigenous people, all the way through all of the different peoples that had arrived in New Orleans and made up the culture. And it was fabulous. It was beautiful. We all said that was fantastic. Until a dear friend of mine He was quiet for a minute. He spoke up. Black pediatrician. Who said, "That's not what I see when I see that truth." So we name it. There are some people in our community who are going to see this tree as a reminder of lynching. I teach cultural competency. I know that we can't know what we don't know. It never crossed my mind. The next step, though, is to frame it. And this is not just to change the words, right? What Graham says is framing what we name is the basis for changing the power of the past. Naming alone is not enough. When we frame what we name, my highlights, in actionable and benevolent terms, we begin to gain the power to resist change from evil. So we name it. There's people in our community that we cannot have this painting in our mutual space, which tells you automatically what the next thing is that you have to do. We have to get a different painting. And then just like the QI cycle that we all know, this is no different. It's fragile, and you have to keep revisiting it. So let me use the example I gave you earlier as an example of how to use contextual creativity. So we name it. We are failing to introduce women with their titles. We frame it. Respect is important to feel like you belong, and titles reflect respect, which means we know what to do. We set an expectation that titles will be used for all speakers, and when people mess up, because they will, we correct them with kindness, remind them what the expectation is that we set. And then we revisit it every once in a while to ask how we're doing. The third thing is the story of us. We have to keep telling and retelling our origin stories. We have to have meetings where we actually are together. And we can tell stories on Zoom, and we're human beings. We understand how to connect when we can't connect in person. But we have to keep connecting. And we have to amplify stories that reinforce who you are as a team. So this is a tweet that I put out, and I'll read it because it's very small. Like, this was such a great day. When a child who has been in the hospital for a long time finally starts smiling and lets you know he likes hot sauce, you go to the store. And so the intern literally went out and bought him his favorite hot sauce, which in New Orleans is Crystal, not Tabasco. And we brought it to him. That's the kind of story that amplifies what kind of team you are, right? And then we have to remember that we have to include everyone and acknowledge history that excluded some. So when we give this talk in all physicians, it's like, well, here's all old white men physicians, right? But it's not just that, right? There's a lot of people that are excluded on this wall. And we have to remember that when we exclude people on the wall, we are sending them a message that maybe they don't belong. It's called belonging anxiety. And so we need to pay attention. Rituals, that's easy, right? Of course, it is easy, except we don't pay attention to it enough. When we graduate as healers, it's more than just a graduation, right? I believe it's true for almost every kind of medical practice, but we take an oath. We have something else that's happening at our graduation other than just getting a commencement address and a diploma. We begin to realize we are part of a lineage of healers that goes back for millennia and will go forward for millennia. When people join the team, we have cake, we have a dinner. Maybe we should make it a little more for ritual. One of my favorite rituals that I know of, the neurosurgeons at Texas Children's Hospital, every time a resident does a case for the first time with the attending has to buy ice cream to the team. We're not talking about pomp and circumstance here. We're talking about the kind of markers we make in a community that acknowledge we are a community and we share this together. Then we all know, we've been to funerals, where the most amazing things were said that we didn't know about the person, right? How do we create a situation, a ritual that lets us do that now, honoring each other before it's too late? The fifth thing is measuring what matters. It's a fact that our current healthcare systems primarily concentrate on measures of productivity. RVUs, money, unfortunately, in the United States, profit. If it's possible in the United States, and I don't know it's true in Canada, so I'll learn that here, these kind of dashboards are shared with every single physician. The benchmark for the productivity they're supposed to have and how far above or below it they are. This is a business practice. This reinforces that individualism, it reinforces the competition, and it has very little to do with belonging. How do we measure the teaching, the caring, the next generation that we're taking care of? And how do we measure people that want to get back to the community? This is my pediatric surgery colleague, Ayla Stanford, who in the beginning of the COVID epidemic had a busy pediatric surgery practice, but realized that the Black community in Philadelphia was not getting any testing and was not getting any immunizations. And she banded together with a group of about 6 other, I know in Canada, I saw the eye rolls. I'm sorry, it's America. They banded together, all different specialties, got in a van and went into the communities, to barbershops, to the church parking lots, and provided the care. This has grown into a Center for Health Equity, and her being asked to be part of the federal government now as an advisor. So how do we measure this? This is not productivity, but it really matters. So the 5 tools: asset framing, contextual creativity, the story of us, rituals, and measuring what matters. And now the answer to life, the universe, and everything. We're getting to the revolution. I'm going to frame it with this important paper that if you haven't read it, I think is important. Tate Shanafelt is one of the best experts on physician well-being. And the highlighted part, this paper summarizes the historical phase of this journey, which he calls the era of distress, the current state, well-being 1.0, and the early contours of the next phase based on recent research and experience of vanguard institutions, well-being 2.0. So the era of distress, he describes like this: during this time, the professional culture of medicine was characterized by a mindset of perfectionism, which discouraged vulnerability with colleagues, encouraged physicians to project they had everything together, and contributed to a sense of isolation. And yes, that is me as a general surgery chief resident. That's about what I looked like when I came to Montreal. Wellbeing 1.0 began early mid-2000s, really in conjunction with the change in ACGME work hour rules in the United States, which Canada preceded us, by the way, by quite a bit. This time began to focus on a message that encouraged physicians to take care of themselves and become more resilient. And what he says we should be heading toward is Wellbeing 2.0, which is a mindset of physician-administrator partnership to create practical and sustainable solutions, where the deans and medical administrators, hospital administrators accept that physicians are subject to the same human limitations that affect all human beings, with attention to appropriate staffing, breaks, and rest as a part of performance. But there's a problem with that. We aren't and can't be partners, in the true sense of the word, with those who employ us. The word partner comes from partitio in Latin, which includes the idea of dividing, that's partitioning, and sharing that which is divided. You can't be a partner with someone who has most of the power, particularly if they see their professional goals differently from yours. And there's exceptions, but almost universally, most of us do not feel we are in a partnership with the leaders in the organizations when we work. 2 years ago, Vivek Murthy, who's the Surgeon General in the United States, put out a white paper in the New England Journal on well-being in healthcare. And he made this claim. The time for incremental change has passed. We need bold, fundamental change that gets at the roots of the burnout crisis. We need to take care of our health workers and the rising generation of trainees. I think we need Wellbeing 3.0. Wellbeing 2.0, the way Tate Shanafelt views it, is that we use data and moral appeals to administrators so that they will provide us the people, places, and money to improve healer well-being. That's not a bold, fundamental change that gets at the roots of the burnout crisis. And so we have to ask, what are those roots? I believe that the root of the crisis right now that we all experience as healers is the moral distress we experience by working in corporate models, whether they are tax exempt, which is the word I'm using in the United States now instead of nonprofit, whether they are tax exempt, whether they're governmental, no matter what the structure is. The moral distress we experience by working in corporate models that we perceive as putting profit before people, which is compounded by the marginalization of healers in these systems. Well, that's easy, right? How do we tackle this? Where do we start? If that's the root cause, what do we do? I want us all to resolve to be part of the 17%. It's a well-known thing in marketing and in sociology, in all kinds of fields, that human communities shift when 17% of the people have a change in the paradigm. Not 50. You don't need a majority. It's somewhere around 17, 25%, but 17 sticks better, right? So 17%. That 17% needs to push back against anything that disrupts belonging, needs to become fierce creators and guardians of belonging. It needs to be a primary focus. But I think there's 3 critical tools for this grassroots revolution, because I'm talking about, that we all have to agree to adopt. And it's not data and appeals. The first is to practice compassion. The second is to name it, to tell the truth. And the third is decide who you work for. When I say practice compassion, I want all of you to, this is one you can take a picture. Also, I'm happy to give my slides. And I have put some of this in my blog, which is wellnessrounds.org, as well, so you can get a connection to this book. Wendy Lau is an ER physician in New York in COVID pandemic, who is also very intensely studying Buddhism. She's since become a Buddhist priest and is the attendant, which means the next in line to Joan Halifax, who's a very famous Western Buddhist philosopher and PhD medical anthropologist. So really fascinating person. This book is a handbook on how to be grounded and become a lever for change in this very broken system by learning how to practice compassion. And there's just a few points I want to make from this, because I think we confuse a little bit what this word actually means. So it's not the same as sympathy, which is feeling bad for someone, or empathy, which is feeling bad with someone. Compassion's the next thing that happens. It's the desire to do something to ease the suffering. And it is something that arises in us. We cannot decide to be compassionate. This is really empathy, being open, having the conversations. We can decide those things. But you can't decide to be compassionate. It has to arise in you. So the whole key here is that practicing compassion means learning the tools, techniques, philosophies, paradigms that allow the opportunities for compassion to arise, to allow them to arise. Very different way of thinking about it, but it's core. So the first thing the 17% have to work on is to really study and practice compassion in this sense of the word. The second thing is to actually name where we are. I tell people all the time, so people will come up to me and say, they just cut the clinic time from 15 to 12 minutes. That's ridiculous. I need yes, a gasp over there. That's real. That's our actual real quote. But there's nothing I can do. Well, you know what? If they employ you and they tell you have to do that, you may have to have clinic times that are 12 minutes. But what you can do is say out loud to the people around you, to your administrator, whoever, that's not normal. And if you're in a situation where you can't say it out loud, you at least say it to yourself. You bear witness. It is not normal to not see a dentist in 3 years. It's not normal to have to rush a visit with a tearful and frightened patient because your clinic is so overbooked. It's not normal to have all the years of training we have and spend hours on medical records at home. It's not normal to stay up all night and then work a full day the next day. And it's not normal to have to immediately go to the next task after losing a child in the emergency room. It's not normal. And the third thing is to decide who you work for. Who employs you is not necessarily who you work for. We work for our patients, our trainees, and each other. So, Wellbeing 3.0 will build on what we learn in Wellbeing 1.0 and what we hope for in 2.0, including working with the business leaders who employ us to solve issues. They're not evil. They don't get up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to do harm in the hospital today to the people that are taking care of the patients. Well, maybe there's a few. I think it's 6% of the population. 6% of the population are narcissists or sociopaths. So let's hold on to those 94%. And I also think that the people that choose a career in the business of medicine are not choosing a career in the business of banking, right? There's usually another motivation. I also think that if we did the studies for hospital administrators, that we would find exactly the same or maybe even more burnout and distress and moral distress. And so I think we can have compassion toward them when we're dealing with that difficult conversation. So anyway, we will include 2.0, even though that's, we're not very old. Wellbeing 3.0 is going to be a grassroots movement that will center compassion to heal ourselves and our broken system, redefine norms for our physically, emotionally, and spiritually demanding work, because what we're experiencing now is not normal. And reclaim our sacred role as healers, because although we're employed by institutions, we work for our patients, our trainees, and for each other. Thank you all so much.
Type of questions to the losses of Paul. So, is there that just in come? You welcome.
Yes, you can hear me out.
No, Mike.
Right. Thanks very much for that wonderful presentation. More so than a question, I guess a type of comment. You talked about marginalization, belonging, social location, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the Jackie Robinson conference room. And there's a picture in the entrance there of Jackie Robinson. I know that I think American football is the dominant sport in Texas, but Jackie Robinson.
We love baseball too, but right now we're in this.
But Jackie Robinson, for those who don't know, is the first, I guess, black baseball player to be signed to a professional franchise. And he got his start here in Montreal. And I guess that was for good reasons. But in addition to that, Jackie Robinson's number, which is retired across all of baseball, and which is worn by every player in baseball on Jackie Robinson Day, was 42.
I have long said that a coincidence is a miracle where God prefers to remain anonymous. That gave me chills.
They should have a question. I have so much to think about this. your talk that there's nothing in particular that I have asked at the moment. We'll see if something comes out, others in the room have questions to ask.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Hannah Wunsch from New York. A lot to think about, as said. I appreciate your journey over trying to figure out what to call us when talking about all of this. And I'll be honest, I recoiled from the word healer when you said it. I work in intensive care, and I find that a lot of the time the expectations of patients and families is that I will heal, and I cannot. And that by using that term, it sets up expectations that can't be met. And I noticed in your talk, you didn't really talk about the role that kind of changing patient and family expectations may be playing in some of this burnout, and how do we combat that and the kind of unrealistic expectations that modern medicine has sometimes set.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that because I always think in terms of cure. That, healing is not necessarily improving the disease. It's different than cure. My wife hates the word healer. She's like, that's too wussy, So that's direct quote. And a lot of people do recoil from it, right? And I've really questioned. First of all, I think one of the reasons we recoil from it is that, and we're all colonized. I have to do a little explanation of that, right? Because colonization is not people taking over land. Colonization is acceptance of the dominant way of viewing the world. And so I think particularly, you and I are both examples of this. I mean, prior to 40 years ago, there were hardly any women in medicine, right? Certainly not in surgery and ICU, and extremely Western, extremely male, extremely white, and they would rather drop dead than be called a healer. Okay, so I struggle with how much of it is that. We also just don't have a good word. I don't think healer is the best word, and if we can come up with one here, it's gone in my next talk. Because we do need a plural that says we are part of a community, we belong together. Because to me, a healer is anyone who's trying to make other human beings whole. And it's not limited to curing lymphoma or taking out an appendix. I don't know if that helped, and I would love to hear anybody else have any ideas on words we might be able to use. We can brainstorm. Oh, and the other family expectation. Woof. Woof. I think all we can do is, and I have this naive belief that if we can meet them with compassion, except for the 6%, that we'll get there, right? I think once most patients have a sincere relationship with the person who's trying to make them whole, the expectations begin to shift. One of the problems with the system we work in is we so rarely have the opportunity for that kind of continuity. And a lot of the decision-making about that has been about efficiency and money. The shifts we have and how we organize ourselves, where we're basically all interchangeable. We were having a conversation at dinner last night, is detrimental to patients' expectations. It's detrimental to us. It does not have a simple solution, but I'm simply calling it out. See, I don't think it's normal to see one surgeon into clinic, visit a second surgeon in pre-op, a third surgeon does your case, and a fourth surgeon sees you in post-op. I don't think that's normal.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Ottawa, in the family physician in mental health. Thank you very much for your talk. That was very insightful. I wonder if you could address the concept of meaning. In my observation and my experience, I find that a lot of my colleagues seem to have sort of lost that. And it was very refreshing yesterday when Ananda made a very good point on that. It's hard to have compassion if you don't really have the meaning. And there's a lot of pressure that I feel always when I teach with medical students, where's this they often call us patient clients instead of patients. And I had to explain why I use the word patient. It's almost like I'm old school, and then I almost had to apologize because I'm using the word of power. And instead, they don't get the sense that this is a sacred relationship, as what Amanda was alluding to yesterday.
Very wonderful points. And yes, along with provider, we must abandon client. I think this is all about meaning. That's actually why I went back to seminary, because when I was working in for the last 20 years on well-being, and I began to realize, it's really not, it's not about resiliency, right? We're extremely resilient people. It's not about doing more exercise and sleeping better. Self-care, it's not about any of that. And yes, it is about the system that honestly is oppressing us, and which is very hard to see, right? Because we're an extremely privileged group of people. But when it comes to spiritual and emotional oppression, we are being oppressed. All of that to say that the reason I went back is I began to realize we had a spiritual deficit disorder, right? That when you are able to be centered in compassion, and again, that is a untethered from any organized way to think about religion or faith or meaning. But if you are able to create a situation where compassion arises in you, when you're going down the street and you see the person who has collapsed in front of you and this compassion arises in you to go do something, that is the expression of meaning, I believe. And so I think they're intricately tied together. But if you try to explain to people how to find meaning, to me it's easier to approach it the other way around, where you talk about developing this sense of compassion and the ability to feel compassion. The meaning has to follow if you end there. That's where I am right now. That could change.
Nahman.
You? As soon as I started hearing the language of provider, I couldn't help but think about how in the Canadian context, one of the most frequent contexts in which we hear this term, including among physicians, is with reference to a MAID provider or a euthanasia provider. So the College of Physicians and Surgeons says MAID provider refers to a physician or nurse practitioner who assesses the patient requesting MAID to determine if they meet the eligibility criteria and ensures that the procedural safeguards have been met, and if so, provides MAID. So to what extent do the objects of care or treatment, the ends specific, determine, culturally speaking, whether there's a sort of vending machine relationship between doctors and people?
So first of all, I had forgotten that euthanasia is legal in Canada. Your talk last night blew me away, right? It's not an option in the United States. We don't talk about this, but I think your point is extremely well taken. Words matter, right? Words matter, and I think in your context, I think it definitely matters.
May thank you for your thoughts, and that I do want to give witness that your method works. I give you a little example on how the 3O is happening good, and I want to show off myself.
I knew this was the group that would sign on, by the way.
Well, I was saying I can run my new life. We see it as okay, go on. But this I love this idea that the compassion comes out from you, not as a decision, but you just see off. And that in my experience being a neonatologist, so willing to save this life, on a certain point I met in this the population of babies who has diseases so terrible that you cannot save their life. And so I felt this administration compassion come out of the and about them. And we maybe we say, well, how can I
save the life of these babies. And so I understood that I can serve their life. And so I was teaching. So for whom do I work for? I work to serve the life of these babies. And from that, let's say, the judgment, I started building up stuff to work for people. And eventually now, 15 years ago, after 15 years, I built a new service in my hospital. And also I work with them, and yes, I work a lot. I put all my effort. I have friends and I'm very excited. But it's like following your heart. No, in a sense, you work hard, the world art is very much mixed to define what the heart is, because it can be receiving fully. It's not sentiment, it's not emotional, it's a decision to stay with the deepest, deciding who you are. And so I will be committed to your father that really works. Very good.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brandt with Physiatrist Breathing. I was listening to your talk and I appreciate the points. And I was just thinking about the disruptors, and I usually people who talk like this would think of these things are coming to us from the outside. But I've been working for 15 years in medicine, and I feel like I've internalized some of these things, like this colonization that you discussed. The answer is solicitor. How do they address that? As somebody who's not in the trainee, who's not a new person in medicine, that does steal this compassion, the moments of here and there, and then steal, if I could, just calculations and leave.
Wow, what a profound question. I would tell you that I think the more we strive to be in the moment, particularly with our patients, the more we are fertilizing and watering the ground that compassion can arise. And and this is why I'm actually calling it a revolution, because it really is, you're absolutely right. And if 99% of the time you're feeling like part of the machine, but the 1% of the time you are being what Wendy Lau calls a healthy lever for change, then change is happening. And so I do think we can't be too hard on ourselves either. We are all just trying to do our best to show up and be present. That's really the key, to allow that compassion to arise. And having meetings and talking with people, and that's another reason I think this whole thing of that's not normal. Because what you're doing is you're getting your agency back. You may still have to be a cog in that machine, but you can actually say, this is not normal. I'm in a sacred healing art. And you're making me do my 5th resiliency training this year, or whatever it is that, we could take a poll in the room of the computer things that we have to do to learn how to be better physicians that drive us crazy, or healers of any kind. Did that help? It sounds a little, in the Talmud there's a saying that if you save one life, you save the world. And I think sometimes we think that we're supposed to have this impact and we're supposed to be different in this huge way. But I think every one of these little changes, every ripple of goodness that we toss into this pool that we're in, combines with the other ripples and leads to change.
Thank you very much for your thought there. One of the things that really struck me at the end of it was also to think about the managers in our healthcare system too also have a distress. And I came to this recognition after starting myself with a lot of disgruntlement at management. I am a hematologist who does bone marrow transplant cell therapy, try to push early phase trials. That's what I do. And I'm constantly being butted against, at least in our public healthcare system, about how, we don't have enough money to do that, or, no, we don't have enough resources. You can't do this, you can't do that. And seeing patients in front of me who are, actively dying who could be on this trial. And granted, it's a trial that might not save them, but it's something that they, want to try to see if it can, be all the severity that has shown us a promise or something. So there's that distress I feel and this frustration that builds against all these barriers that but then as we were going through this talk, I started to think actually about my father, who actually was a hospital administrator for about 40 plus years. And then when he retired, semi-retired, when he was 65, he became a healthcare aide. And so he's actually still working as a healthcare aide when he was 75. And so for the past 10 years, he's been healthcare aide, the biggest business in this, helping them do whatever they need. As I saw him suffering burnout, moral distress as a healthcare administrator. And then, he's 10 years older, but he looks 10 years younger from, this different role that he's in right now, where there's the expectation is for him to impress somebody. And they call for him by name now, and they want to keep him present there. And so this brought me full circle through this talk to think about what can we do to also help those people who are imagining who are the good 60 or 94%, right? Not those bad 6% who are way up there, especially in like a Canadian system where it's not profit maybe that's driving the concerns and this sense of scarcity. As what we do is really help that scenario and help those people who are in there to feel meaning in their job. Because I feel like if they were to actually feel more meaning in their job as an administrator or as a manager, that they would be able to help us more. Because again, at the end of the day, they might be employed by people further up. I think they also don't feel like that's not who they work for or why they do the jobs they do.
I agree, and I think, going back to the concept that it's so easy for us to do us and them. So easy. And you go into all kinds of situations where there's this butting of heads between people working with patients and people who are administrating the money to work with patients. But at the end of the day, they actually have the same needs and same stress as we do. And I think just knowing that and having the conversation start in a more compassionate place when you're meeting with them and acknowledging that what they're experiencing isn't normal either probably goes a long way. The system, the arc of justice bends, but very slowly, and we have to push it a little bit. But they're part of this team, and I think we forget that.
Thank you so much. Emanuela from Altabangan Yamathonius. Talking about coincidences, yesterday I've been, for the last 2 days, I've been immersed in a course for leadership GY, for movement. In my hospital, at Yontala, that is one of the first hospitals in Canada, actually, that assumed a, completely, embraced the business-like model as American hospitals do. The 2 days of session with all managers, there were physicians and there were managers talking to us about the quality improvement, how important for them is these days, etc. And at one point, we were so somber and maybe they told us, you can do whatever you want. You can fight as hard as you want. But if you don't align with the aim of the hospital, your quality improvement is going to be discounted. Your quality improvement project is not going to see the light.
That's not normal.
I know. I'm talking about coincidences, which I don't believe, but I raised the issue and I said, no, there is something wrong here because, it's not possible. I mean, it's not normal. We are, we were talking about healer touch versus, I was finding about the question of, the same thing that we discussed today, like providers versus, customers instead of
Well,
patients.
customers and clients.
Yes, customer and client. So I raised the voice. And the leader, yes, the last slide put up was that, the one that you left down. And she said, this lady believes that small groups of people can make a change. I said, I wish I can meet Dr. Brandt. I had no idea, I didn't know. And today I'm here listening to you. And
Well, but Mark, so sociologists, the 17% also applied in Nazi Germany, right?
mm-hmm.
It doesn't automatically say that it's a change for good.
Correct.
All right, so it really still is about meaning and vision and alignment with the good. And so, yeah, it's scary that they learned that.
Yes. I was, I said, I wish one day I'm going to meet this lady that wrote this stuff.
Margaret Mead,
Yes.
I
And
believe she's no longer with us, but
Yes. And then I said, and I think in the next discussion, probably we should talk about a little bit about this phrase, about this, lady, what she wanted, and how can we, going along with my colleague who just said, how we can invade the managerial world, in a sense, with some good ideas for us and our applicants.
it was just a comment. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Andrea Mariani. I work at the Mayo Clinic, and what you show about, it's the place where educate fashion worked for some time, and then he left actually because of a kind of a difficult time that there was in which they pushed against the productivity. What I saw for us exactly in that place is that what helped me and other friends there is to get together and share this meaning. So like finding people, friends, and actually administrators. There were and there are also administrators who come to our group as well. And we started to get together, and we started to eat twice, like every other week, and read something about our work, or we find an article, we invite people to speak, or we share the journey. We go through difficulty, we have difficulty at work, we have difficulty with sometimes our leaders or patients, and so this part of the small group that makes the change, it's really the change, at least for our life, it happens. And what keeps us together is really sharing a meaning of what we do. So just wanted to thank you and to share this. And by the way, I am an evil gynecologic robot.
No. That's technology for good.
I just give you a highlight at the book that you showed.
Yeah.
One of my teachers was there.
An even more appropriate
No,
example.
I'm just joking because you showed that as.
That is the social technology of power.
But now I'm just giving you a hard time. But no, I really wanted to thank you because it really reminded me about this, and when you showed this, that sharing the meaning is really what helps us to find people that may not always be like-minded like you, really, but that really want to share the journey with vulnerability and really caring about each other. For us, it's also caring about each other, because sometimes what makes people alone is wanting just to follow a rule. I don't know, sometimes I see the difference between caring for each other and wanting to follow the rule. I have colleagues, they take us. I'm colleagues. We respect each other. But I know that if at a certain point the institution will tell that I'm breaking that rule, I know because this happened. They are not we're not together anymore. So it's something, sharing the meaning is different than sharing just a rule. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, and I don't know if you experience this.
I think the example of that committee meeting was perfect.
Yeah, there are some people that you can, they are good people. You can trust them. But until we do something that breaks the rule, in the sense that, there are some examples that I really can't share in public, so sorry. But I hope you understand where I'm going.
I think you're describing what I was hoping to describe. You may have just said it better, which is that's the moment when you look at what's happening and what they're saying and say, that's not normal, right? What you're telling me to do is in this colonized view of why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing, but that's not normal if your paradigm is taking care of other human beings and taking care of each other. So that's, yeah, I think both of those were just wonderful examples.
My name is Paul, and we wish him with other. I wanted to ask you, I don't know if it is possible, but in my experience, I've been stuck and always fascinated by someone who was living with compassion. Didn't this happen to you?
Oh, yeah.
And number two, you had a group with whom you developed this experience as well, appealing to us.
Oh, that's a good question. Not officially. It's a grassroots revolution. And yes, don't we all know? I mean, in part of whatever religious tradition you follow, generally who you follow and the ideas you follow are based in compassion, right? This is not a foreign concept to most people. And when we do meet someone who's actually really following it, whether it's the Pope, whether it's the Dalai Lama, whether, we are moved because we recognize that truth. And so, and maybe that's what we are all aspiring to individually and as groups, is to just get closer and closer to that.
Thank you for your time. My name is Jim Bush. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and work as an RN in the oncology area in patient. And I appreciate the question about somebody from the ICU or about patients' expectations, the family expectations. And I feel like in my practice that when I approach those situations where expectations seem to mirror what you've just described as a negative on the provider side, the being, that it's mirrored in our patients, right, and their expectations.
Sure.
But when they encounter someone who sees them and wants to walk with them, it changes also their expectations, even if the prognosis is poor. And that, in my experience, is the only thing that Biddle seems to choose.
So I appreciate it.
I agree. And, there are so many unreasonable expectations for families. And one of the, and I had to deal with this in the neonatal intensive care unit and with surgical problems is one of the most devastating, I think, microcosms of this, because you have young parents with infants that externally appear normal, often without any of the training or understanding, either socially or emotionally, or certainly not medically. And to try to bridge that gap seems almost impossible a lot of days. And I just had to keep going back to they are the ones that are vulnerable. Okay? They're the ones that I'm here to support. And my goal isn't to change their mind. My goal is to take care of the infant and them and to watch for the triggers. Oh my God, you can get triggered. I would get so angry. There were families that I had to walk out and say, listen, I'm gonna come back, and just because I was gonna say something I regretted because they were being so irrational and I was so tired and I just left something that, wrecked me. And so we're human. Families' expectations, wow, it's, I just have to just keep reminding myself they're the ones skillful.
But just another comment, because it just came to mind the difference between this belonging. So it's really the question to who you belong that you made that makes the difference between my friends on the journey with me that we belong to a deeper meaning, and my good colleague, great that ultimately belong, in one way or the other, belong to this. And so what you said, and so if you belong to the institution, sooner or later, something may happen.
Right, well, and the problem is you can't belong to an institution. You can only belong with people. So you are heading for a car crash. That's the way you view it, I believe. Yeah.
But so thank you. But sorry if I read a thing, but it just came to my mind. What is it? Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, doctor from psychology and family medicine. One of the reasons I went into family medicine was to have a relationship. And I think summing up a lot of what people are saying here is the importance of relationship. If we judge ourselves by the outcome as the business model of medicine dictates, we will fail. But if we walked on the journey with our patient, we will epic. I can't prescribe humility. What's the answer to alcoholism? It's nothing I can prescribe. But I have to meet that person where they're at and walk with them. And the victory is humility, to accept what they can change. It's not, do you turn them out?
Oh, that's so well said.
And when we judge ourselves based on what the A1C that be is, we don't win. We have to help that person live their life, lead them where they're at. Why are they not making progress? This is, I think, well, you allude to a lot of questions about. It's about relationship. And with administrators, with the insurance somehow, I don't know how to do that, but how do we have that? How do we have that in ourselves? And that, for me, has made the difference over the years. Because I trained before 2005, and I'm supposed to control with them. And realizing that they're not is a new work with them.
That is so well said. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a really rich talk that gives me a lot to think about. I have a question, and I'll be quick, about how we achieve this revolution, what the steps are on this app. I had in mind the nature of medical education now, and how there are lots of changes happening in the States, at least, that seem to be moving the needle in some of these areas, but not so much in us. So I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts about the singular method that could be used in the context of forming, I have in mind, future positions. I'm sure the same applies to other dealers that can transmit this approach to the vocation, this approach to the patient, this approach to colleagues. Like those you see that work at Baylor, that don't work, I just welcome your thoughts.
So I'm smiling because I have to tell you why I came up with this, right? Or why I started thinking about this grassroots revolution that is individuals beginning to see the world a different way, till you get to a tipping point of enough individuals who see it differently that you begin to really move the needle, right? I think I did a whole lot in medical education as well, and yes, there's some hammers we put on in duty hours that made shifts, and there's teaching that we do that makes shifts, but this is an entirely different thing. The reason I came up with this was in seminary thinking about, and actually it was in a class on liberation theology, but thinking about in the face of an empire, in the face of someone who has all of the power, who and what in our civilization, in our history, have been able to change that, right? And it's never been by laws or rules, or it has been, in my faith tradition, Christ, it has been Muhammad Gandhi, it has been Martin Luther King, and it has been this movement in the way, this absolute certainty of why and the meaning, and living that and being that 17% who says, no, the way you view this is not the right way to view this. And maybe we don't have the answer of what the new way should be, because we may have to evolve into that, but this is not the way it is. This is not normal. And so it's not a good answer, because I wrote papers and designed curricula and tried to change medical education, and still would, because we still have to keep up those things too. But when we're talking about this, when we're talking about this big social change that makes us more loving, more caring, more compassionate, we can't make rules or policies. That has to be 17% of us who says, no, this is more important than anything else we can do. I told you I went to seminary. If you give me something that looks like a pulpit, I'll do it. Okay? I can't wait to talk to all of you and hear some of the differences of Canada versus the U.S. and get some feedback. This is an evolving thing, right? And I'm excited about evolving it and how to evolve it, and I'm delighted to be here to meet all of you. Thank you.
I think you saw the questions and answers there. It's very beautiful outside. There's a way to get on that they're us, and there ought to be another goodies being served. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Brandt, for a wonderful and amazing talk. Very moving to be in us. I'm so happy that they're here, and I'll do this.
Thank you.